Took a bit of time off from my work day to do this for you guys in Central Florida. Hopefully I'll get to come over there one day. But yeah, I guess probably the most important thing here, I'm co-host of a user group as well. It's called Data Platform Down Under. We run local time here in Brisbane, midday. So I'm not sure what time that is for you. We're about 15 hours ahead of you. So it might be late night for you, but obviously anyone can join. So yeah, if you want to look us up, feel free to do that. So let's get in and talk about monitoring. And basically there's, well, I guess there's only really three aspects to it. There's you're collecting data, you're reporting on data, and you're analyzing that data. But obviously you want to maybe do it in real time. You want to be alerted to things. But essentially it's just data, and we're all data professionals here. So yeah, I think we'll hopefully find it quite interesting. So you might read in documentation, this has been referred to using different language. Like I think it used to be called like Operations Management Suite. And it's gone through a few kind of changes over the last, I don't know, 4, 5, maybe 6 years. But now it seems to have landed in a place where it's, there's just one great story for the monitoring. Like we've got Azure Monitor. And then we can, put monitoring data in different places, store it, analyze it with different tools, built-in tools, and Power BI, other third-party tools, both within Azure and outside Azure. And it's, it's like I say, it's quite a good story. So we'll go through, have a look at what's happening. So it's now a bit more straightforward. And I've got a few of these slides. We're not going to just look at this slide and go, why monitor? And I give you like a whole host of reasons why you should monitor. We'll look at different reasons throughout the presentation, but it is quite straightforward. Once you know where to look, I think getting that starting point with any technology is quite crucial and sometimes a bit not that straightforward to do. It's built into the Azure platform, but you don't have to just monitor Azure resources. Whether you can monitor virtual machines, you can monitor things you've got on-prem, even from other clouds. You can send monitoring data into the Azure ecosystem and kind of use the monitoring capabilities as a one-stop shop for your monitoring. And certifications, a lot of people doing certifications at the minute. A lot of people with a bit more time on their hands. We're all working from home, so great opportunity to do different things with our time. And nearly all of these certifications have got some aspect of monitoring in them. Whether it might be 5, 10, maybe as much as 20%. Things from data exams to AZ-104, the administrator exam on Azure, architect exams, all those sort of things. They've all got some components of monitoring in there. And once you've learned this subject, really, you can flow through a lot of things. Literally all the stuff you do in Azure can be linked back to monitoring, and ultimately it's going to make you a better engineer. So let's start at the big level, the macro level. When you're building a component in Azure, a resource or something, obviously you're going to put it out there to customers. You don't want to be giving them SLAs that are bigger than the Azure SLAs. You want to be looking at the Azure SLAs, which are obviously quite high. They got 5 nines, that sort of thing. But you don't want to be promising things that you can't deliver. So there's pages we can look at for that. And the service status within Azure. That's a good thing to have up your sleeve to just look at. So let's just flick over to those pages and have a look at those. Okay, so kind of seems obvious. The service level agreement page. You can find the service level agreements for any of your Azure services. Now, just remember that things that are in preview don't really have SLAs as strong as the SLAs that are in that are there for the production stuff. So putting something into production that's in preview, you might want to think twice about that. Some things remain in preview for quite a long time, and some things come out of preview. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at things. But the Azure status page, which is loading at the minute, this is an interesting page, and I see people making decisions about why their application isn't available based on maybe social media saying services were down or things like that. But you want something a bit more concrete than that, so you want to come and look at this page. So obviously there's a load of pretty straightforward stuff on there. We see all the regions across the top, but there's a few more interesting things here. So you see in the column over to the left-hand side, non-regional. So Azure resources or services that are non-regional. So we see a few there. We've got Azure Virtual Desktop. We can scroll down. We look at a few other things, DNS, a few content delivery, traffic manager, a few things that might not surprise us. But as we scroll further down, we can look at some of these things, and let's actually find what we're going to talk about, and that's the monitoring capabilities. Before I do that, just look at how this is laid out. So, for example, here, I just picked this at random. It's nothing to do with monitoring, really. Azure Cognitive Services. So that's the main sort of product. And underneath, we've got, slightly indented, all the services that are within the Cognitive Services kind of brand, as it were. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And then we go down and we'll look for the Azure Monitoring, which is underneath our governance, I believe. Yep, here it is. We found it. So management and governance area. And yeah, we've got a lot of stuff in here, but from the, the Azure Advisor, which is a good place to actually start looking for things. But now we come down to Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor is, and I probably shouldn't have clicked on that. I think the page actually refreshed that. So I have to scroll back down. That is one annoying thing about pages that do refresh. So Azure Monitor, it's actually built in to the Azure ecosystem. And it's got a few things there by default. So Azure Logs and Azure Metrics. So all your services that you provision, they all push at least some sort of data into metrics and logs. So metrics are things like, that just have a specific value, like performance counters, latency, that sort of thing. Logs are more, your traditional type of logs. They might have different kind of values and that kind of things. Diagnostic logs, they're available literally in all of the Azure services, and you can push them into what we call down here log analytics. So when I first started looking at monitoring, I kind of found the language a little bit odd between sort of this activity log and the diagnostic logs and the log analytics. Where was the separation? Was there a separation? And that kind of thing. But as things have come together over time, the lines begin to blur a bit, and people talk about log analytics in the same breath as kind of diagnostic logs and something called Azure Monitor Logs. So one of the same thing, but once you get used to all this language, you can find your way around quite easily. And one of the crucial things we might want to look at with monitoring is alerting. So, we don't want to be plastered with alerts, but we want to know when things are down. And in fact, we might want to even know when things are looking good. So there you go. We've just refreshed again. So I'll basically get off that page and head back to the presentation. So that's it, the macro level. But yeah, there was one other page I did want to look at there. We'll close that down and finish looking at it. And those two pages we've just looked at are in fact, the public pages. You don't have to authenticate to them. There's another one. This is for the DevOps service, and we can see there that globally at the moment there's a bit of an advisory going on with GitHub repos. So 3 pages there that are all kind of publicly accessible, but really interesting to be able to see that. But one of the things I'd like to point out here is the Azure Service Health page. Now, as well as the other information, if we go to this page, we can see kind of, information about the history of our resources in general. And while we're in here, we'll actually look at the alerting. So we can set up alerts on the health of our resources and the services in general that are there in Azure. So let's just set up an alert. We might be jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but the alerting mechanism within Azure is kind of very consistent. So regardless of whether you're setting up an alert for, at the macro level like we're doing at the minute, or for a specific service or a specific piece of data, it's kind of all very, very consistent. So you'll see a button up the top that asks you to set up an alert. You'll obviously I'm not going to set up an alert for 187 services, but you filter down to what you wanted to do here. And then you'd add what's called an action group. And an action group is really, we'll actually create one here. A group that you want to have something to happen. Your alert to go somewhere and do something. So let's just pick something here. I'm not actually going to set this up. I'll just fill it in with a bit of detail, because the next screen is really the important one. So we want a notification type that we're going to have a look at here. And we can email a role, or we might want to sort of, do an SMS notification or a push notification. And then we can see a flyout over here, and we can, configure an email address, or we can do SSMS. And a lot of this is free up to a point. And then, obviously if you're sending a lot of messages, or maybe a lot of emails, maybe not emails, or voice calls even, you can actually have voice calls here. Once you go over a certain limit, then obviously there's a price to pay for that. But the interesting one over here is like the action. So I'm not going to save anything there. So the actions we can take when something happens. So, and we've got a lot of choice in the type of actions we can take here. We can call a runbook, or we can call a function. So with both of those things, we can literally code what we want to do, how we want to take action. We don't just have to send an alert. We can, maybe look to correct it ourselves. You can push stuff into your own sort of IT service management system. Logic apps, again, you can, do something there similar to Azure Functions, webhooks, or, maybe if you expect this data to be coming at you pretty fast, you might want to push it into an event hub. And obviously then with an event hub, we can link that to, streaming analytics or something like that, or push it to literally wherever we want. So the options here are, quite in depth. And you've got a lot of choice about how you want to handle alerting. So we don't actually set up an alert here, but the alerting interface, generally, this is what you're going to see at whatever level you are going to set up your alert. So that's alerting. Might have a look at that in a little bit more detail later on. But let's head back over to the slides. And so that's the service health. A really good thing to look at. And remember, there's a shared responsibility model within the the clouds in general, whether you're with Azure or AWS or whoever. There's things that Microsoft are responsible for, but there's things that you're responsible for too. So while you might expect those Microsoft to keep up the service, the storage or the identity or whatever, occasionally those things go down. And if they do go down, or if there's some sort of problem with them, you want to be notified about it. And that's probably a good place to start. So just getting advice in general. So a couple of places you can just go and look for advice. Azure Advisor. So you can choose, go into Azure Advisor, and it might tell you a whole heap of things that could be improved about your service. But you might want to go and improve those yourself, but also set up some sort of alerting or monitoring to know, if they slip or something happens, you want to be alerted. And the other services as well, the Security Center and Azure Sentinel, which is a bit more fully featured, can be used to have a look around and see what you might want to improve in the system and give you ideas for what you actually might want to monitor, and set up your own custom monitoring for as you sort of go forward. So yeah, a great place to start. So, like I say, the picture of the monitoring ecosystem, it's actually quite big, really. So you've got Azure Monitor on one hand, and that's made up of metrics. Metrics are literally single values, a bit like performance counters, maybe latency, things that have a single value, and they are metrics. And then we've got logs. So logs are, things that, give you a bit more information, might collect multiple values, might even give you, sentences about what's happening within the system. So a bit more fully featured than metrics. So as we go into Azure Monitor, we can look up something called Metric Explorer or Log Explorer. They're essentially very similar. And they link it to something called Log Analytics, which we'll come back to in a minute. Now, we've also got something called Application Insights. Now, Application Insights basically allows you to do kind of custom logging, if you like, custom instrumentation in your own code. So you might have designed, an Azure function, and you might want to instrument that with code that tells you how it's performing. And you can do that, and you can send those details into, say, a Log Analytics workspace. Probably jumping ahead of myself a bit here, but it'll all tie in, and see what's going on. And with all these custom codes, it allows you the ability to send data in from other places. That might be your own virtual machines that are running on premises, applications that are running inside other clouds, or anywhere really. That's really an application management platform, pretty standard kind of offering, but it allows us a great deal of flexibility. And I just thought I'd call out here as well the activity log, maybe overlooked in a lot of places, but every operation that we do in Azure, it's all logged within an activity log. Now, sometimes the information is a bit obscure to get out. It's all logged in JSON format. Sometimes you might have to trawl through the JSON to look at the errors. I found this quite handy yesterday. I went to set up, actually went to set up a Log Analytics workspace in a particular region, and it didn't set up. I had a problem. I was like, that's kind of strange. It's obviously quite straightforward to set up. What went wrong? And as it turns out, that data center seems to be under a lot of pressure at the time, and I was using a subscription, basically a free subscription, and they were like, you're using a free subscription, we're not going to allocate the resources to you at this particular time. And the initial error message I got wasn't really very helpful at all. And then I trawled through the activity logs, found what I was looking for, and I was like, okay, there's a lot of activity going on at the minute. I'll just try another data center. And then it kind of worked. Okay, so they're the three, really, what I would call it, the three big ticket items within the ecosystem. But I guess the overarching thing that brings them together there is something called log analytics. So log analytics is very similar to the metrics and the log explorer. Basically, it's a database, to what, for want of a better word. Will store all the data that you send to it. So any diagnostics that you actually set up and decide to send into log analytics will stay there for, I think it's 2 years. It was 2 years last time I looked anyway. It might be a bit longer now. Contrast that with the metrics and logs. They stay there for about 93 days, something like that. Again, that might have changed. So check these figures out in the docs as you go forward. But log analytics data will stay there for, let's say, 2 years. So what happens if you want to store your data for longer than 2 years? Well, you can also send that to a storage account, and that will basically store it there indefinitely. Now, it's probably not as nice a ways of trawling through your data and examining it in a storage account as there are with log analytics. But yeah, you've always got the option of placing your data back from the storage account back into something like log analytics, or even Azure Data Explorer. So log analytics is it's been around a while, but it's based on something called Azure Data Explorer. So probably just going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. The Azure Data Explorer, it's basically a big data solution. You can input your own data into it. You can pull data from storage accounts or that sort of thing. And you use a language called Custo query language. It's kind of like SQL. Well, obviously you query data, but it's not T-SQL. But you use the same sort of concepts to query the data with pipes. So if you're used to PowerShell and you're used to piping sort of commands into other commands, that's kind of the setup that exists in Custo query language. And the reason I bring that up is because you use that language, that Custo query language, to query Azure Monitor, so it monitors the log metrics. Use it to query log analytics, and you'll also use it with Azure Data Explorer. So we'll have a look at all of those three things going forward and see, if they'll be of benefit to us. But another thing we can do here is we can send data into event hubs. And you might want to do that if you're, say, monitoring and you expect, big streams of data, big streams of monitoring data constantly coming into your system. And an event hub might be the place to pull that data from. And obviously with an event hub then, it's streaming the data in. We might want to examine that with Stream Analytics and then filter off to a storage account or wherever. We may never want to look at it again. We might just want to keep that data for compliance purposes or something like that. Or we might want to use it to set up our own kind of machine learning, AI, that sort of thing. But, storage is cheap, so we can put it literally wherever we want to put it. So we're going to dive in and have a look at these things in the portal at the minute. Just before I do that, I might ask Priscilla, were there any questions that had come through or anything you wanted me to cover in a little bit more detail?
I was just wondering if you had some kind of portal access so that we can actually view the activity logs or what it's talking about.
Yep, that is exactly where I'm going now, Priscilla.
Okay, never mind.
I'm going to dive right into the portal right now. Yes, I'll do that. So I guess one of the things with kind of presenting or teaching in general is, where do you start? Do you start with the do you start with the data, or do you explain things in the portal to start off with? So let's just
I find it that I dive into the portal and I go and I explain, because the brain is kind of like an interesting thing.
It is indeed. It is indeed. So, okay. So here I put right up the top of my list, Azure Monitor. So I've got Azure Monitor here. And another difficult thing about this specific topic in general is getting data into the system to look at. So what we probably see here, I don't have much data, but I do have a solution for that. And we will be looking at some things where there are lots of data going on. So this is the monitor here. And you can see, as with anything, we've got the activity logs up here. Like I say, some of these, diving into some of these, I'll just try and find something that I did in the last week.
Is it possible that we can just see the full screen of the the Azure portal is really small to see. I don't know for you guys.
Okay. Okay, I'll try and increase that size. So the shortcut key is, what is it? Control X or Alt X?
I see. It's pretty big now. Good.
Has it gone big? Has it gone
big?
I
am going into my zoom ratio and I'm picking 100% the original size. But then I have your face. Oh, never mind. I can make you small. Never mind. Anybody having issues with the size?
No. That's kind of fine. I'm making it a little bit bigger myself.
It's just me. Never mind. I have it. I'm getting old.
That's all right. Our eyesight's never the best. So if I was to choose the things
Very
that are,
nice.
Let's say errors. So I just want to point out some things, and yeah, you might go into these here, and yeah, you'll have to actually dip down into the JSON to find out exactly what the error is. It's not the nicest thing in the world, but at least you can get into, you can get a lot more information out. So yeah, just that's a bit of a tangent. But obviously, if you want to go into metrics, so you just click on metrics and you get what we call the metrics explorer. So we can look at any of our resource types that we've got set up here. I don't think I've got too many actually set up. SQL databases, Australia East. Yeah. And yeah, I've actually got nothing going on in my subscription at the moment. I just wanted to show how you get to it. We're going to look at places where there is more data in a minute. And we can drop down, metrics, whatever metric we're interested in looking at. Aggregation we can look at. Obviously, there's different aggregations for different metric types. And the logs are the same type of thing. We get that log analytics workspace going on. So we might, come in here, let's look at some performance. And we've got some things that Microsoft have decided are probably pretty obvious for us to look at, or things we might want to look at. For example, they've chosen our weight stats. Again, I've got nothing going on here, but interestingly enough, it's actually put a KQL query into the window for us. So obviously this one was generated automatically, but we can go write our own if we want to. And yeah, we're going to dive in to a better example of this very soon. But those pieces of information are right out the queries for us, and we can go diving into that. And then we got the service health there. We've also got something here called workbooks, which is similar to what we just looked at. But Microsoft have decided that, and you can create your own workbook if you like, but, configuring the interface to look at specific things Here we're looking at VM availability. Again, I haven't got anything in there, but you know, whatever we want to look at in here, you know, performance, perf counters, or availability, we can actually do that. And then we come down to insights, which you know, we've added different resources that we might want to go and look at, and we can actually get to this section from within the actual resource itself to look at. But let's just get out of there a minute. Let's just go into log analytics, because log analytics is kind of where you probably are going to want to put most of your monitoring data. So I've actually set up a log analytics workspace around here, and it's literally very, very simple to set up. I mean, you don't need to put any kind of details in there to really. You obviously got to pick your resource group, you give it a name, a region, and that's it basically. You've set up your container to go look at. I'll just get rid of that. You've basically then set up your container or your database to receive your monitoring data. So with that in mind, how do we put our data from our resource into log analytics? So let's go look at something we might want to do there. So SQL servers, we might want to, so I've got a SQL service. I should have gone to Azure SQL because I'm actually looking for a database. So Azure SQL. So yeah, so I'm actually looking for a database here. So that is a database. So let's click on there. The reason I've chose databases is probably because a lot of people on this call are database professionals, and I don't know, might be more relevant. So, but literally all the resources are kind of quite similar here. So you'll come down and you'll generally see a section called monitoring. And you can get to them same alerts, metrics, and logs from here that we see in the Azure Monitor. But the one thing here that I'm interested in is the diagnostic settings. So we go into diagnostic settings and we'll see, you know, there's a list of diagnostic settings that are not pre-configured, but available for us to put into our log analytics workspace. So if we want to just add those to a workspace, we just click on the Add Diagnostic Settings button. And then you see we can pick any of these. We can pick errors, you know, query store, anything like that. But as well as the log analytics workspace that's right at the top. So we just pick the log analytics workspace, and then we pick the workspace that we wanted to send it to. So we don't just have the choice of sending it to log analytics workspace. We can obviously archive things to a storage account, like I say, event hubs. We can even send them to partner solutions. I've not actually used the partner solutions. I presume you either develop them yourself or you get them from, you know, the partner store from the Microsoft store. But log analytics is really the go-to place where you want to be sending those details. Obviously, you can send them to multiple places. You send them to a storage account too. Different retention times there, and obviously better ways of querying depending on where you are pushing it to. But yeah, 2 years retention time in log analytics, pretty much indefinitely in a storage account. So that's how you set it up there. Now, I had said that I didn't really have the data available to look at inside the portal. Okay, so that'll probably be a problem that you're going to have as well if you want to just experiment. You know, where can I get a Azure portal experience where there's lots of data that I can go play with within log analytics. So Microsoft have put together this here. It's called basically the log analytics playground, and it's you have to authenticate to it. So it kind of is publicly available, like anyone can get to it, but you've like got to have a kind of Microsoft account to be able to get to it. So I obviously log in here with my Hotmail account. So once you've got a Microsoft account, this is available to you to log in. So you just have to authenticate and you're there. So let's look at something here. Let's just look at, like, say, the exceptions that have happened. So we'll see that there's a table that basically collects exceptions. So let's click on there. Yeah, and you just want to demonstrate KQL. So in SQL, we might write a select statement. We don't really have to do that. We can just like run the exceptions. Now, there might be a lot of them in here, and that might take a long time. So that's showing me the last 24 hours. One thing I would do if you want to experiment here is limit your result sets when you are experimenting. So there's obviously, there's 1,006, which is not a lot of records, 1,678, but some of these tables within KQL or Azure Data Explorer will have a lot of data available. So in SQL, we got the top command. Here we've got what we call the take command. So let's just take 10 records from there. So just so we don't take up too much space, or we can also limit, which is a keyword that's available in a lot of other RDBMSs too. And the IntelliSense we get here is really quite good. So we see that we put the bar, like we're piping data into another command. So then we could go where. And then, we could say, let's just pick something here, the application name equals whatever. Let's pick something else a bit different. Ends with, I don't know, E. And we could just run those queries, obviously pick something there that's not available. But this playground in general is a good place to go and sort of get up to speed with KQL. So that's one place where you can go look there. So just going to get out of the portal there. Now, there is another place where you can go and look at getting good with KQL, because this is really one of the, I'd say one of the key takeaways from the monitoring experience here is to get good at reporting or even alerting or whatever. Collecting the data, like we see, it's really a case of just, ticking a few checkboxes, pushing stuff into maybe log analytics. And after you've done that, it's no good just storing the data. You want to get insight into what's happening. And in order to do that, obviously you can use the GUI. You can limit things and make workbooks and all that sort of thing. But, if you can query things with a query language, you can probably get far more insight and customize things in a way that you actually want to do. So Microsoft have got over here another free tool. This is basically Azure Data Explorer. So basically, a more fully featured log analytics, so to speak. So you can actually set up, Azure Data Explorer instances in the portal. And once you've done that, you can import data into there. This data that's in here, it's not really diagnostic data. It's just this data that Microsoft have made available for you to have a look at and run queries against. So I think this actual data is concerning like storm data in the US. And we can see that we looked at the limit and the take queries. We can run a few more queries in here. And you'll notice some keywords here that probably you don't see in SQL. You can extend. And extend's basically a computed column. You're basically giving some column an alias. and then you are, doing some sort of computation. Here we're doing end time versus start time. And then in SQL, we generally have the select keyword. Here we've got the project keyword. So we've seen before, you can just put down your basically table, so to speak, and run it, and you're going to get everything back from that table. Bit like doing a select star query. This one's obviously taking a bit of time because there's a lot of data in there, so I'll cancel that. But if you want to just get back columns rather than a select star query, then the project keyword is basically the thing to use. So you can, yep, there we go. Yep, so you just project out the type of queries that you want. You can, as you'd expect, instead of grouping by, you've got the summarize keyword, which will do, obviously a very similar thing to grouping. And you can do that sort of thing. Where clauses, you literally pipe everything to, so you're piping the full data set to a where clause, and then you're obviously slimming down that data set. So there's another data set going through to the summarize command, and then from that, there's another data set going through to the where clause. And finally, this is kind of really cool, I think, you're putting that out as a chart. And the interface inside Log Analytics or even Azure Data Explorer, that'll let you, pick the type of chart you want, but you don't have to rely on the interface. You can do that programmatically through writing code. So that's Azure Data Explorer. So the real takeaway here is the KQL language, sort of, and getting good at that language will allow you to, explore and get insights to your data and your monitoring data a lot easier than you would like. So I'll just pause there and see. Been through the portal a bit there. Probably jumped around a little bit there, Priscilla. Any questions?
No questions so far. I do have a question for you, though, from me. So the Azure Data Explorer, is that something I can download in Microsoft Documents, or?
Right. No. I'll answer that question. So no, it's the Azure Data Explorer is a resource or a service within the Azure ecosystem. So it exists in Azure. So rather like creating an Azure SQL database or a managed instance or a service account, you would create Azure Data Explorer. So if I look in the portal, if I go Data Explorer, and we see the Azure Data Explorer clusters. So we click on Azure Data Explorer clusters there. And I set one up last night, but if you want to set one up, we won't set one up here. We'll just look at what the information we need to set it up. Not really a great deal of information to set it up. You're just going to need the cluster name. And obviously that's going to then have a URL, a bit like or a URI, a bit like your SQL database has a URI. You'll get a URI for the cluster name of your Azure Data Explorer. Select a workload type. And you can have availability zones depending on where you put it. A few other details like scale and that sort of thing. And that's Azure Data Explorer. So does that answer your question, Priscilla?
Yes, thank you. And I had another question. Just jumping back, you were speaking about logging your analytics, and you can also put it into data storage.
Yep.
I think you said the data lake. Is there or maybe it's, I think it's data lake you could put into, right? Or is it the blob? I forgot which one. But is there a charge for that? Do you need premium, or can you just, or is that just with the service?
Obviously, I think you'll have to pay for it. I think you'll pay for ingesting the data. Obviously, there's a small charge for storing the data. So yeah, there's a charge somewhere along the line. But I've always pulled the data into a data lake. I presume you can pull it into blob storage as well, probably a little bit cheaper for you. But yeah, your storage account, you can just pull your data into any kind of storage you like, really. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, and you can actually link up from your, provided you've got the right permissions from this interface here. You can actually link up to your own cluster that you've got there, and basically that interface there is just basically a full screen interface of what you would get if you went into your own cluster and you went query, and you get the same interface here, but just kind of on a smaller scale, so you don't have as much kind of real estate. So yeah, I just kind of brought Azure Data Explorer up there because it's probably a bit nicer to experiment with KQL and get to know it. But once you get to know KQL, you got options open up for you. You got Data Explorer, logs, log analytics, the metrics explorer. It's really something that one of the key takeaways here is to get to know the KQL language in quite a big way. And just while we're on that, there is a plugin for Azure Data Studio. So Azure Data Studio, obviously a download, links up to, traditionally SQL Server databases, but you can also run notebooks in there. So this is a notebook within Azure Data Studio. The kernel I'm using here is Python. So the same URL that I just, similarly, this URL here, I'll post this in the chat shortly. This will basically tell you how to link up. But basically, all you do is you run a couple of commands. You actually got to install a add-in. So there's actually a KQL add-in for Azure Data Explorer. So you would install that. You run a couple of commands, and then you just have to authenticate. If you run this command here, similar to what a lot of Microsoft stuff does, it will give you a code and a URL. You basically go to that URL, put the code in. I was hoping it would show us there, but it hasn't. And then you're free to run the KQL commands, and you'll see them within Azure Data Explorer there, all nicely formatted. So yeah, a really good kind of additional, what we call it, data manipulation tool, and you don't just have to use this for researching your logging data. So that's Azure Data Studio. Yeah. Okay. So let's just round out the presentation. Back to the slides. And so, why should you monitor? Well, have you ever heard of the well-architected framework or the cloud adoption framework? They're kind of a framework, so to speak, that gives you guidance on how to build good, strong cloud resources. So, there's a security component there, a reliability component, performance and operational efficiency, how to optimize for the cloud. And if you're monitoring all of these things, then, you can kind of be a bit agile about it. As you can see, your resources aren't being used at a particular time of the day. You can maybe scale them down. You can see, what pages are being used the most, maybe dedicate your resources to that. And basically over a period of time, you can tweak and, get good value for your customers to kind of experiment with, so to speak. So that's the well-architected framework and the cloud adoption framework. So there we see, kind of a big picture of how the ecosystem looks. Literally by default, things will go into the metrics and the logs. Not everything, but there's always a subset from every single Azure resource that will go into the monitor, the logs and the metrics. Bear in mind, they're only going to stay there for 90 days or so. If you want to retain them, you probably want to put the same metrics into something like log analytics or a storage account. And then there's a whole heap of things you can do from there, visualize the data, analyze it with machine learning, so to speak. We looked at setting alerts up, using things like logic apps and that kind of things. And you're not stuck creating your log analytics workspace in the same region as your resources. You can create them in other regions and basically ship your data off to a region. One thing you might want to consider about your log analytics workspace is you don't just have to have one. There might be multiple people or multiple roles that are interested in the logging data. Operationals people, security people, and you might not want each of those roles looking at the same log analytics workspace. So you might want to set up multiple log analytics workspaces, which is perfectly possible. And then obviously there's other places where you can put them there. So I talked about, the portal and also the Azure Data Studio add-in. So that's a great place to learn this language, hook up to the free resources that are available, and experiment away to your heart's content with the language. So there was a demo there about setting it up and searching for things. Already been through that. Now, as well as our PaaS resources, we can also monitor, our virtual machines, be it Windows virtual machines or Linux virtual machines. And all we need there is basically an agent. So we can download an agent from the web page in the portal. We need to configure, obviously install that on the machine, and then we get a key that's generated from inside the resource, and we hook the two together, and then we can send our monitoring from our virtual machines straight back to Azure. Now, obviously, if you just set up a virtual machine yourself, or you've maybe got an on-prem virtual machine, you're probably going to have to do that yourself. But if you maybe use one of the templates that's available within Azure, then you can probably, that will be configured for you. So for example, I'm going to use SQL again here as an example. If you go to, SQL virtual machines, I got this screen by just going to Azure, basically SQL Azure. Obviously that's a family. But if you set up a virtual machine from here, you'll be able to pick the image you want. And that will all be configured for you. So the logging will go back to the portal for you. So we looked at taking actions, we got our action groups. One thing to just note about there that I didn't mention when we set these up is some alerts are stateful and others are stateless. So what do I mean by that? So say you want to alert when your CPU, let's just say CPU, exceeds 80%. So and you want to get that every minute. As you cross that 80% threshold, do you just want one alert? Or if it stays above 80%, do you want an alert every minute? You'll kind of just have to choose. Maybe you just want to be alerted once. And then when it falls back below that 80% threshold, obviously it resets. And if it goes back above, you'll get another alert and that sort of thing. So some things retain state and some things don't. As well as that, there's rules about how often you will be alerted. So some of the ones that are kind of stateful or stateless, they might only alert you a certain amount of times in a 5-minute period. And that changes a little bit. It's certainly changed a bit over the time that I've been looking at it. So it used to be kind of 12 times a minute, 12 times every minute or something like that. Or but you just have to go read the docs and find out how often they fire. So we looked at workbooks. That's a way of getting different interface views of your data. Just touch on application insights here. If we set up our own logging into Azure, we can basically have Azure draw a map of how those applications interact with each other. There's also something called a service map, which is very similar, that will tell you how virtual machines are interacting with each other. So as well as obviously the alerting and the KQL stuff and all that, there are aspects to Azure that you might not initially think about as being valid for monitoring, and this is probably one of them. And there's something similar with kind of virtual machines or networks, something called a network watcher, where you can look, how things interact with each other. And knowing all that sort of detail will allow you to create, better monitoring solutions and ultimately better alerting solutions. So let's look at, why we might want to monitor, historical analysis. We might want to keep our historical data. So we can do things like machine learning, we build up data sets, but also, compliance and that sort of thing. And storage is cheaper than ever, also very available. And, you can't measure what you don't monitor. So, monitor whatever you want. So that's kind of rounded us up a little bit there. We've talked about, the Azure Monitor and, log analytics basically, and how the logs, the metrics and the log analytics, they're all kind of combined with the KQL language and even the Azure Data Explorer. So we've seen that we can monitor virtual machines from literally anywhere. We can put in our own, agents that are freely available. And we can also interact with monitoring services in Azure programmatically. So, building monitoring, say, in custom applications or even in other clouds, and send them through to Azure. So that brings us up to the top of the hour. I think it's 10 o'clock for me, and probably a bit earlier for you over there. So that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation. So I'll hand back to Priscilla and see if there's any questions there that you've got, Priscilla.
Hi, Marty. Thank you. That was great. No questions in the chat, but I found it very interesting, especially Azure Data Studio. That seems like it's a plugin, but it seems very helpful. And it seems like you can use it for different services, right? All the databases, relational and non-relational.
Yeah. Sometimes I overlook that because I deal with databases a lot. So I'm kind of in and out of there quite a lot. I kind of forget that it might be, it might be a new thing for a lot of other people. So it's basically very, very similar to Visual Studio Code. I think it was built off the same code base, but yeah, it's got a lot of plugins for Git, obviously the KQL one. There's a whole bunch of plugins similar to Visual Studio Code. So yeah, definitely advise you to go away and have a bit of a play with that.
Yeah, that is really cool. I also have a question, it looks like in the chat, from Felipe. He said, yep. Do you believe in the near future, the cloud environment services will take over? I mean, integrated applications, merging tools for analysis start to end.
Sorry, just read that out again, Priscilla. Just the end bit about taking it.
Just the end part.
Yeah.
He says he means integrated applications, merging tools for analysis start to end.
Yeah, I guess so hopefully I've understood that correctly. I think you're talking about, basically data from a lot of different mechanisms, be it Azure or Google or your own custom applications coming together in one unified environment. and being able to mix and match, maybe to seeing, okay, what's going on in the virtual machine operating system at the same time as what's going on in the application, at the same time as maybe what's going on in the database that the application's talking to. And for the most part, you can do that at the moment. I basically showed querying one table, but you can join tables and, you know, link up to, you know, what was going on at 10 o'clock on my virtual machine, what was going on at 10 o'clock in my database, and what was going on at 10 o'clock in my application. So you can get a pattern of what was happening, sort of the bigger picture, as it were. Hopefully I understood that, and I've answered it okay. But yeah, I probably do believe that there's probably going to be more and more integration for this going forward. I see a lot of people moving to the cloud, especially over the last 2 years, especially as COVID's kind of come along, kind of more focus on moving to the cloud. And I guess that's just going to become the predominant computing platform as we go forward. But that's just my opinion. So hopefully that answers you, Felipe.
He said, thank you, Martin. So it looks like it did answer his question.
All right, cool.
All right. Is there any other questions? If anybody wants to unmute, and feel free to talk. I don't hear anyone else. How about Gilda? Gilda, are you still on? Okay, I don't hear anything from Gilda either. That was really great. I really enjoyed learning about monitoring and different places you can check it out. Azure Data Explorer and Azure Data Studio. Also the KQL language. I never heard of that. I've heard of I think they were talking about USQL for that one before.
Yeah. So USQL's more, integrating with data lakes and that kind of thing. I guess there's a lot of languages around that. I don't know if USQL's kind of, been surpassed maybe by, or there's more focus on people doing things like Spark and that nowadays, but it's obviously still used. But yeah, I guess the big takeaway from here is the KQL language. And that will benefit you in a lot more ways than just looking at monitoring data. It's probably going to be a big language going forward. So hopefully people will dive in and play with that.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. I saw it in the notebook. So were you integrating that with Python on
there?
Yeah.
So that notebook I had open, obviously that was in Azure Data Studio. So it was using a Python kernel. So I picked the kernel. The kernel was Python 3. The first cell, I basically set up the KQL magic. And then I linked up to an existing cluster, just one that was already there that Microsoft offers for experimental purposes. And then basically once you've done that, you just run in your commands.
Oh, that's really cool. I did not know that.
Okay, cool. I hope that helped everyone else on the call.
Yes, and I am recording, so I am going to stop recording right now.